Here in the heart of Britain, Central is your local ITV station.
The news from ITN.
Lawson warns the January sale spenders I may raise interest rates again. The mailbags on the Pan Am Jumbo which no one checked at Frankfurt. The gift of sight for the boy who was almost blind. And the Gunners shoot ahead in the First Division. Good evening. The Chancellor, Mr. Nigel Lawson, says he won't hesitate to raise interest rates again if he needs to. He said his interest rate policy was the best way to fight rising prices, and he insisted everyone would be much worse off if he'd allowed inflation to get out of hand. The opposition leader, Mr. Neil Kinnock, accused him of comatose complacency.
Britain seems to be waking up from its 12-day holiday with an economic hangover. After a free-spending Christmas, there are signs that shoppers are feeling the pinch as mortgage payments rise. And the holiday firms, which normally find this time of the year perfect for selling sun and sand, are uneasy.
Quite a lot of people aren't actually going to get their new mortgage costs until February, March next year. And I think the holiday business is one which is dependent to some extent on confidence. When people feel they will have the money, then they'll make the bookings. When they're worried about the availability of cash next year, they'll hold off.
As a Murray poll in today's Times confirms, people fear the worst. 74% expect inflation to rise in the coming year, compared to 48% last year. The Chancellor says the economy is going ahead in a satisfactory way, but won't have lifted the gloom by confirming he is prepared to see interest rates rise again.
I'm confident that inflation will respond to treatment, but of course interest rates are the essential instrument of monetary policy, and I shall not hesitate to raise them whenever it is necessary to do so.
The opposition believes the economy and the Chancellor are in trouble.
We're going to have the worst trade deficit in 1989 in Europe, and we're going to have amongst the highest interest rates and the highest inflation rates. Now, the question is what the Chancellor should now do, and I believe he should use the weekend conference he has with ministers to admit that his budget strategy has been wrong, to end his exclusive reliance on high interest rates, and to bring forward measures that will give us a budget for investment in our long-term future, instead of his obsession with top-rate tax cuts for a few.
Alan Beath of the Democrats joined the attack, saying the Chancellor's policies could not deliver.
Conservative backbenchers will take some comfort from the latest opinion polls, which show their party 10 points ahead of Labour. But there's a growing feeling at Westminster that as the mortgage increases in the pipeline come into effect, the Chancellor in particular faces an unhappy new year. Peter Allen, ITN, Westminster.
West German authorities confirmed tonight that the Pan Am jet destroyed by a terrorist bomb over Lockerbie was carrying post bags that hadn't been checked by security staff. 4 United States military mail sacks and a document pouch weren't screened at Frankfurt because they'd been continuously under the control of the American military.
While investigators are now certain a bomb hidden in the forward cargo hold of Pan Am Flight 103 was responsible for the Lockerbie disaster, today's revelations from West Germany exposed another worrying security loophole. At Frankfurt Airport, where they pride themselves on their stringent security, every single piece of luggage was checked before Flight 103 set off on its journey. But the Frankfurt prosecutor's office admitted today that sackfuls of US military post, some of which were recovered from the Lockerbie wreckage, were not searched. ITN's terrorism consultant says many airlines carry post without checking it, a loophole open to exploitation by terrorists.
The freight loophole is very serious indeed, because you only need a quite small package to contain a bomb device. A packet the size of an average sugar packet from a supermarket would have been sufficient to contain the explosives and the detonator required for the bomb which blew up the Pan Am at Lockerbie.
At Lockerbie, the police have been able to return the bodies of 86 of the 242 victims recovered to their families for burial. They include 10-year-old Joanne Flanagan from Lockerbie, whose parents were also killed. The missing tail section of the jet has been located 15 miles from the crash site. In all, 20% of the plane has so far been recovered and transported away for examination.
17 more people are tonight reported to have been rescued alive from under earthquake rubble in Armenia. French radio said they were found in the remains of a grain factory in Spitak. They survived for more than 3 weeks by eating grain and drinking melted snow. Nearly 80% of Spitak's population died in the disaster. The survivors were discovered when bulldozers moved in to clear wreckage. Rescue workers had given up hope of finding anyone else alive. Thousands of former prisoners of war have launched a campaign to be paid money they say they were cheated out of while they were held in German camps. The government docked a third of their wages because the Germans were paying them, but the camp money turned out to be worthless.
Bungie Bracken's war ended in 1945. His battle with the British government has continued unabated ever since. Captain Bracken was one of 10,000 officers captured by the Germans during the Second World War. For the last 43 years, he's led a little-known campaign to win back money he says the government cheated him and thousands of others out of while prisoners in Germany. As the Wehrmacht steamrolled its way across Europe in 1940, the first of more than 130,000 prisoners began their long march to camps back in Germany and Eastern Europe. The officers unaware that from the moment of their capture, a third of their pay was being deducted back home. Behind the wire, it wasn't until 4 years later that British officers realized that the worthless camp money they were issued with was being taken out of their salaries back in Britain. The Ministry of Defense says all deductions were made under the terms of the Geneva Convention, and that when the men finally returned, refunds were substantial and widespread. But Bungie Bracken estimates that £750,000 is still owed to ex-prisoners. That's £12 million at today's rate.
We were all at the sharp end, and yet we were being cheated by our own government. And it simply isn't good enough.
Captain Bracken was 29 when he was shot down in a torpedo attack against German shipping. He hopes his final engagement will be at the High Court, seeking permission for a judicial review into the whole affair.
An 18-month-old boy who was almost completely blind has been given sight by surgeons at Moorfields Eye Hospital. Christian Clements was born with cataracts in both eyes. Now, after complex microsurgery, the toddler has almost perfect vision.
Only a few weeks ago, little Christian Clements couldn't even play with his brother and sister. At one stage, it was feared that he might never see again.
He wasn't like the other children. He used to just sit and not play with toys. He wouldn't watch the television, you know, and he used to just look up at light bulbs when they were on.
Was there a time when he thought he might not be able to see again?
Yeah, for quite some time. Before the operation, when he first went into hospital, when we first realised there was something wrong, it was in doubt for quite a while whether he'd ever be able to see again.
But thanks to a team of surgeons at London's Moorfield Hospital, Christian has got his sight back. Through complicated microsurgery, the cataracts have been removed. Christian will now be able to lead a perfectly normal life. So for the Clements, this new year has been one that they'll never forget. Susan Osman, ITN, South London.
Now, with news of today's sport, including all the goals at the top of the First Division, here's Mark Austin.
Arsenal's best league crowd of the season, 45,000, watched the Gunners go 2 points clear at the top of the First Division. They beat North London rivals Tottenham 2-0 at Highbury, after this morning's leaders Norwich could only manage a 1-1 draw with Queen's Park Rangers.
The Raps came off the famous Highbury clock to reveal the strangest kick-off time in the league's history. But perhaps for Arsenal their time has come at last, for without ever being in total control, they still managed a half-time lead. Merson's oblique shot deceiving the despairing Mims. A shot helped by a fortunate bounce off the pitch. And just when Spurs thought they'd played themselves back into it, Arsenal's lucky streak continued. Lukic felling Waddle and somehow getting away with it. Terry Venables would no doubt be interested to hear the referee's version. But in the second half, Spurs added to their own problems with a bout of goal shyness. Stewart the biggest culprit. And by the end, they were too stretched to avoid Arsenal's Thomas from making the scoreline look unbalanced. Peter Staunton, ITN Sport, Highbury.
At Loftus Road, Norwich looked anything but league leaders as Rangers remembered some of their tricks from last year, Gunn denying Falco. And it was only a comedy of errors in the Rangers' defence that led to Norwich undeservedly going ahead. It was a fairy tale return for Alan Taylor, two-goal hero of West Ham's 1975 Cup final, who hadn't played in the First Division for nearly 9 years. Rangers battled away for the equaliser as time ran out, but 4 times the brilliant Norwich keeper denied them. But just 1 minute away from 3 points, even Gunn couldn't stop this Falco special. It was nothing less than Rangers deserved. Giles Smith, ITN Sport, Loftus Road.
Alex Ferguson was this morning celebrating Manchester United's best result of the season, but the 3-1 win over Liverpool was followed by defeat today at Middlesbrough. They were beaten by the only goal, scored ironically by Peter Davenport, who left United last October and until today hadn't scored in 11 matches for his new club. Millwall hold on to third place after an 87th minute winner against Charlton. The cross from Sheringham, the header from Cascarino, and substitute David Thompson scored his first for the club. Everton's title challenge hit trouble at Forest. Unbeaten in 10 matches, they went down 2-0. The first, a fierce strike from Gary Parker.
Finally, the American television evangelist Jim Baker, whose ministry was wrecked by a sex and money scandal, has made a comeback after 2 years.
Give us 300 more people to call on their credit card right now and say, I'll give that $1,000.
With appeals like this, Jim and Tammy Baker once controlled one of America's most profitable television ministries. But after Baker confessed to adultery with a church secretary, the couple were forced to resign. A year later, a second evangelical preacher also admitted to sexual misconduct, turning to his wife to make a public confession.
I have sinned against you. And I beg your forgiveness.
Today, Jim and Tammy made their triumphant comeback, explaining how they'd fallen from grace.
I think the devil said, this is it. I think I've got to smash Jim and Tammy Baker.
Well, you know, Jim, too many marriages were being put back together, too many babies were being saved, too many street people, their lives were being totally turned around, too many people were getting saved. I think the devil was just angry.
I do too.
Now they're back in business with a new prayer line and are hoping to regain their old lucrative position in the evangelical ratings.
And that's the news tonight. From all of us here, good night.
You're watching Central, and here's the regional weather forecast. Overnight it will be cloudy, but it will stay dry with temperatures around 4 Celsius, 36 Fahrenheit. A chilly night with a light southeast breeze. Tomorrow will start cloudy with patches of mist. By the afternoon we may well see some sunshine in the east of the region, but the further west you go, the thicker the cloud will be. No rain is expected until after dark. The maximum temperature tomorrow, 9 or 10 Celsius, that's up to 50 Fahrenheit with a freshening wind from the south. And that's the forecast here on Central. In a moment, it's back to tonight's film, Raiders of the Lost Ark.